one problem with men that, not men, but it can be for a lot of people, is what's really unattractive is when a man lives a double life. There are so many men that in public, they might be very admirable, might be very successful, whatever it is, but their private life is one that is shambolic, or one that they're embarrassed of, or they're ashamed of. They might be doing things privately that they're not proud of. You need to become a man that if there was a camera following you in private, you would actually be proud of the things that you do in private.
If you can't acknowledge the spiritual realm, there's really no answer to any of that. It's just, I need to be with somebody that makes me happy, that basically fills this void, and that's just sad. It's pathetic, in my opinion. It's pathetic. You're just using each other until you die.
Okay, yeah, so really. And see, just the fact that and it's understandable, I'm not criticizing you, but the fact that you go, really? Okay, why would that be that shocking? Like, people cheat all the time. People step outside of their relationship all the time. People like diversity of sexual partners.
Okay, so here's the question then. Have you ever seen an affair in the presence of someone being in love?
All right, guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about dating, courtship, and eventually marriage, if that's even important to anybody anymore, or if we should even be doing it. We're going to put that in question. Really, what is it? And is it something that is going to be effective for today's day and age, 2024 to, let's just say, 2044? So let's get right into it.
Honestly, you can have every ingredient, but without self-esteem, man or woman, no relationship can't flourish, sadly. It's such an important ingredient towards any relationship, because without self-esteem, there's no self-respect. And without self-respect, there's no mutual respect. So it's a really difficult one. So if you're struggling in relationships, you're not actually struggling in relationships, you're struggling in self-esteem. You don't know how to love or be loved correctly, and as a result, your relationships are destructive.
If you realize that it is a game, it is a challenge, right? And you listen to what Sadia was talking about here, is if you can't build your character up, your person, if you can't build your self up, without using any analogies, if you can't build some self-confidence and work on yourself, do the self-care, do the work on not just your self-esteem, but your self-worth and things like that, and can't become a whole person, then when you go to this game that you're playing, or you go into the dating or the courtship stage, without a doubt, you're going to have this void going on inside of you because you didn't do enough work on yourself. And whether you want to acknowledge it or not, or whether the other person can see it or not, there's going to be a void there that you're looking to fill. And a lot of times in our relationships, we're not willing to do the work on ourselves to become as complete of an individual as we possibly can. Nobody's going to be perfect at this, but as strong and as well built up as we possibly can, which takes work individually, not with somebody else. Because once you get with that other person, you have to start doing the compromises that are good compromises. Hopefully she compliments you in a good way, where you're now compromising some of the bad features that you built up, because we do that, and we need somebody who compliments us, who can make us a better individual. But if you hadn't done the work on yourself, and if you hadn't been working on your self-confidence and working on, essentially your self-worth, then when you get into that relationship, you're this malleable player that, on the game, on the board, who is essentially just waiting to get used, essentially just waiting to, like, I have this void that needs to be filled because I don't like to be alone, and I'm on this date and I'm with this person and I hope she's the person that she can be. And if she's half of that, I'm just going to make it work because I got to fill the void. We've all been there, right? And with just a quick, funny little thing, I was talking to a girl recently, and we were talking about Yellowstone, and she was like, yeah, I really like to be like Beth, which, clearly danger zone, right? But of course now I'm starting to get involved now that I realize it's like red flag mode. So now I'm getting in, and I'm imagining to myself, I'm like, so you're probably looking for somebody like a Rip, right? And she's like, oh, no, absolutely not. I'm looking for somebody like, I don't even know the guy's name because he's forgettable. He's kind of like a little beta cuck boy. It's John Dutton's son, the one that's like a little bit of a like fairy boy. He's married to the Indian girl. Anyways, if you guys haven't watched Yellowstone, you're not going to know anything I'm talking about. But the point was, in my mind, I thought that after listening to this girl's explanation and our conversation, that she was going to want this really tough, strong dude who can take the bull by the horns and be Billy Badass, rip. And turns out she wants the guy that's kind of like a little bitch and like, but he's kind of strong when he needs to be. But basically, he's kind of like a beta cuck. He just kind of does whatever his wife wants him to do. And, of course, in my mind, I'm like, yeah, this ain't going to fucking work out because I might be a lot of things, but I can't be that guy that just sits around being told what to do. That's why I'm still single, So
what do you think has changed that makes it hard for women today to respect and fall for the average man?
Men have worshipped sex in a way that they've never done before. And as a result, what before would make a man want to marry you would involve a woman having a lot of good qualities. Before, a woman would think, okay, I have to come from a good family, or maybe should go to school, I should maybe educate, I should, really learn how to cook, I should do something with my life, I should sew, I should do something. This is our grandma's generation. They knew that you make too many mistakes, you're going to be left on the shelf. In this day and age, the women that are actually the least promiscuous and most traditional, don't have sexual experience, struggle to find a man. Whereas a woman with every surgery, with every tattoo, with all of her body out everywhere, she has endless queue of men. Now they're going to argue, no, but we don't want to marry those girls. They're actually lying. Men are very happy to marry the woman that gives them the most sexual pleasure. They think that's not true, but you ask them which of your exes or which woman had the biggest chokehold over you, and it will be usually the woman that they enjoyed the sex with the most. And when a woman learns that she can get away with murder simply because you're hyper attracted to her, it makes it impossible for her to respect and want to be with you. Impossible.
Now, if we can get to something more serious here, is if you can acknowledge the spiritual realm, if you could acknowledge that this world we live in is not the basis of everything, that's not just like what I can see and touch and feel and measure is the only thing. I'm trying to be very simplistic here because we don't think about these things when we get into ultra complicated things like relationships, right? If you're acknowledging that, let's say you're in the community of Muslim, Christian, whatever faith you have, for right now, we're just going to deal with that. You acknowledge that there is a supernatural realm, and in that supernatural realm, it gives us some other things to think about when it comes to love and relationships. So with the Bible, right, you have 1,500 years roughly that it was actually written during that time. So you have a huge span of time. Now you have 66 books in there, and out of the 66 books, there was 40 authors, different authors, all telling the same story of who God is, what he said, and what he's done. 1,500 years, 40 different people telling the same story, right? 66 books. Now, this is talking about supernatural events. This is talking about the gospel. Then you might be thinking, oh, well, I don't even know if I could trust the Bible. Fine. Go do your own research. Please go look up the authenticity of the Bible. Please compare that to anything else. The Quran, the books of Buddhism and Hinduism, I can't think of their names. They're always written by one individual. They don't have any type of historical strength when it comes to translation of manuscripts. They're always it's all fallible, right? The Bible's fallible. All your other historical books of antiquity or religious books are fallible. Like you can look at it and say, is this real or is this not? What is the evidence that this is trustworthy literature? Measure all those other books compared to the Bible. You have the Bible, and then you have all this other little bullshit. Okay, so it's not even in the same category. It's not even real. It's not. All you'd have to do is actually look that up and start looking up the Bible. You'll never question that shit again. You'll be like, what the fuck? How does anybody not even had any understanding on the Bible? This is like the Bible in and of itself is enough for you to never question anything that is in it again. You're going to be like, it's impossible that this could have been carried along like this. There's just no damn way, And so go ahead and do your own research. But now I'm going to go ahead and lean on that's the truth. Now, if you go that route, now we got all kinds of stuff to talk about. Now we can really get into some really good stuff, right? And in this stage, now you can look at marriage as something that has nothing to do with you and the other person. Now marriage has to do with Christ and the church. It's not a sacrament the way Rome would teach that it would be, but it's actually a living, breathing representation of the gospel by the husband demonstrating Christ, the wife demonstrating the church, and how that comes together, right? Husband leads in love, right? And it's a selfless love, like a redeeming style love. The wife is actually going to respect her husband and receive that love and show submission, not abusive submission or value submission, but understand that he's the one that needs to be laying himself down and she's the value. She's the prize, right? These are just overarching, symbols that we represent, right? And it's way deeper than that, but there is an order to it. And there is an understanding that is much bigger than me and you, or this next dating situation we're going to get into, or this next courtship situation we're going to get into. Way bigger, not even in the same boat, right? And so in that case, you can now start to anchor all of your practice, all of your strengthening, all of your skill that you build up on dating, on courtship, on marriage, everything you find out with Sadia Khan here and with James Sexton about divorce, things to kind of prepare yourself for, not to do these things so you don't find yourself getting divorced after you start really understanding the whole meaning of marriage, and then you see it go to shit and you feel really bad. You don't want to do that, right? You want to listen to a guy like that. Sadia Khan, she can give you an insight as a guy from a woman. For the woman, she can give you an insight from a woman's perspective. You start bringing these things together and you start realizing, okay, now I'm building a skill level up, and I'm building up a strength within myself and a self-confidence, a self-discipline within myself. So I actually have a good value proposition for the other person. Now I can actually offer something to the person that is sitting across the table from me, not just put up a facade of like, okay, what can we get on Instagram to where we can show off our little relationship because I have a void that needs to be filled and I need to get that done. So let's hurry up and see if we can get past this place. Let's go ahead and have sex and see if that's going to work out good. Hopefully that's going to go great. And then let's start getting some pictures on Instagram, baby. Let's get it rocking and rolling because I need to have fulfillment in my life. That's what we want to avoid. We want to build a skill. We want to build a self-confidence. We want to build a strong player on the board. That way, once you're out there and you're actually doing your thing, you actually have something to where the other person is going to have deep value and worth. Once they unwrap the layers of you, they realize, wow, it gets better, not worse once I get to know the person. See what I mean?
I don't think that people should wait to have sex. Not wait for
I don't
marriage
think
to
it's
have
realistic
sex.
in this day and age, sadly.
Not even realistic. So I'm giving you what I think is just wise. So if I'm trying to lead you to human flourishing, I think there are a lot of things that go into sexual chemistry, and you're not going to know if you have sexual chemistry until you actually have sex. And say you said they're obsessed with vagina.
Yes.
Both of those words are accurate. Literally obsessed.
Why?
And well, evolution has guaranteed it, right? So I didn't do anything to want that. I didn't even grow up with pornography. So, I mean, it was there, but it was really hard to get a hold of. So until I was probably 25, I maybe saw 10 different women.
But it didn't hijack your young, because your prefrontal cortex would have been developed by then.
No.
So, yeah.
Well, by the time
you got it, so it wasn't hijacked.
Mid-20s for sure. But pornography did completely derail me when I was...
Most men can report when they first saw pornography because it has such an impact on their brain.
Well, no. The year without pornography becomes one of the most important memories of my childhood.
Okay, so this one's absolutely for the Christian community. This is sex before marriage conversation. Now, this is going to be biblical in nature. It's going to be revelational, epistemological precepts, foundational knowledge found by the character of God revealed in Scripture. Ground yourself in those things. Ground yourself in the information that we get from Scripture, in who God is, what He said, and what He's done. And then how does that apply to the current topic, which would be sex before marriage, right? Or the seventh commandment, which is adultery. Now, if you think about those things, when you start putting those together, now there's two different topics here, okay? There's adultery, which has a very acute meaning when you think about it, but then it also has a more broad application because God has always treated His people as His bride. When it comes to a symbol, you're committing adultery when you're worshiping another God, right? So it's an acute thing because we can tell you that commandment is clearly saying when you're married, do not sleep with another woman or man, right? So now sex before marriage is a whole nother conversation, right? It's a whole nother conversation. And the reason it's a whole nother conversation is most of the time we think in the Christian community, sex before marriage, that would be considered adultery or porneia or fornication, right? Now, I'm not disagreeing with any of that at all. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm not saying go have sex, and I'm not trying to separate those two. What I'm trying to say is what we're confusing is when the marriage takes place. The marriage takes place when you have sex. So it's not as if God says, I want you to never have sex until a wedding takes place. Then your sex is okay. That's not, you'll never find that in the Bible. Yet that's exactly what we think in the Christian community. I cannot have sex until I get not just married, I have to go through the wedding. And then after the wedding, I can have sex. And then because we're married, at the wedding is when we get married, then we get to have sex. That's what everybody thinks. That is not even it's not even close to what has ever been discussed. And it's not even close to how we should be viewing this. And it's not even close to anything that we have ever been able to be obedient to. Because way back in the Sermon on the Mount, Christ blows this up. He obliterates this whole idea by saying, don't so much worry about adultery, because if you've even lusted after a woman, you've committed the adultery. So we're not looking at this in a legalistic lens. We want to look at it in a revelational, epistemological way to say, what was God saying? And why did he design sex? And why did he give us marriage, right? Why is that? Because we know this. We all struggle with that. We all struggle with that one. Whether you're in a marriage, whether you're not married, whether you're thinking about getting divorced, whatever it is in the Christian community, you're thinking a lot about adultery. You're like, gosh, this whole thing would be a lot less difficult if I didn't have to worry about sex all the time. Because, if you're not married, you're like, God, I really want to start having sex. If you're in a marriage, you're probably like, damn, the sex sucks now and it used to be really good. I want to have sex with her. And then if you're thinking about getting divorced, you're like, I really got to get divorced, because after I get divorced, then I can go find somebody to have sex with again. Stop it right now. You know that's what you're thinking. And there's a lot of little peppered up other little components that come in, like, oh, so-and-so is, not making enough money, or, oh, she got kind of fat, or she's mean to me and she doesn't give me the respect I need, and, oh, our kids, and all that. Fuck all that shit. Stop it right now, okay? It comes down to the sex ain't right, okay? And I know the sex isn't the main thing, but what it is when it's not on point, it's the indicator that there's all these other little issues, right? But the main thing is that. Otherwise, you'd be roommates and you'd just be like, this roommate's really upsetting me right now. Luckily, I don't give a shit about that roommate, because he does his own thing and I do my own thing, or she does her own thing and I do my own thing. We're still living together because we need to financially, but I label my milk in the kitchen, and then she stays in her room and I stay in my room. No big deal. We kind of know when we're not going to be home. That ain't the case. That ain't the case, right? With husband and wife, because at the end of the night, you sleep in the same bed, and doesn't matter what's going on. At the end of the night, the husband's like, man, I really want to fucking get into that shit. And the woman's like, if he fucking touches me, I'm going to divorce him immediately, because he's been doing all these dumb things, right? And she's over here thinking about the fucking guy she saw at the gym, or the guy on TV, or the guy that mows the lawn, or whatever it is. I'm not saying you act on it, okay? I'm just saying that is always what it goes. So-and-so is making me mad. And all of a sudden, you're opening yourself up to adultery, right? Or to cheating. So let's think about this. Let's think about what God has said about not weddings, but marriage, right? And you're going to be surprised at this, because this is what you want to think about. This is what you want to actually focus on as you start realizing, how can I understand how to have a enjoyable marriage in a sexual way? That way I'm not feeling the friction and wanting to go outside of this marriage, whether it's now or in 40 years from now. There's always going to be some friction, but you need to know what it is all about so that you can know how to avoid the loss of enjoyment in that department. And it would start, number one, you might be thinking Genesis 1 or 2, when he talks about Adam and Eve. We'll talk about that. But this is the one that you want to actually understand and think about. So it's Genesis 24, okay, with Rebecca and Isaac. And if you don't know it, don't worry about it, because this is really straightforward, okay? Genesis 24. Let me just read this. This is super simple. We don't even need to get into the context, but we can down the road if you'd like to. Hit me in the comments. I'm sure there'll be plenty. So, okay. Genesis 24, verse 67. Then Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah, his mother, and took Rebekah. Okay, we know what that is. They had sex, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Okay, so let's just go in that order one more time. There's no wedding. There's no, they courted for 2 years. There's no worries about families coming together. There's no worried about children, although that was a worry. But they weren't like, let's get together and find out if we can have some kids. And is she going to be good for that? Because it turns out she was barren. He had to pray after that. He wasn't like, okay, she's going to be a good one, although she was a virgin. But the point is, there wasn't any courtship. There was no dating. There was no nothing going on here. And there was no wedding. It was literally, he took her in the tent. They had sex. Then she was his wife, right? So then Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah, his mother, and took Rebekah. And she became his wife. That's it. And again, we don't need to go into context, but there is no courtship prior to this. They had never seen each other up until a few moments before that. He sees her, boom, takes her into the tent. They have sex. That's his wife. Then he loved her, right? This now, okay, we're going to have to do some context. This is Isaac. This is the promised seed. He's going to birth Jacob, and nations are coming from this, right? So the point is, this was not a joke. This was not like, a one-off where God was like, man, they were supposed to have a wedding, but no. This is a very important marriage right here. And there was no wedding. The point is, the wedding is not important. Never has been. Are they phenomenal? Absolutely. We all love weddings, right? They're fantastic. Should we keep doing them? Absolutely. Should you hold yourself to the point where you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm sinning if I'm having sex before the wedding? Absolutely not, because you were sinning anyways. So don't get confused and think my sex with my husband or wife is different after the wedding than it is prior to the wedding. No, it's not. It's different the moment you actually have sex, because at that point, you're married. So I'm sure everybody's listening right now like, this motherfucker, he's just trying to get it to where people don't have to get married. No, I'm not. I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying that it is way more serious than you think. I'm saying that the moment that you have sex, because all of us do before we get married on the wedding day, right? In your dating stage, in your courtship stage, you end up having sex. It happens almost to every single person, right? And that's the day you were married, right there. And so all the consequences that come from God, how he hates divorce, are coming right after that. So I'm saying we need to elevate the understanding of sex before marriage and how serious it is, and stop with this wedding shit, okay? Because it's cool and we love it, but there's so much pressure on people about thinking of like, oh, how am I going to get from where we are today? I just met so-and-so on fucking Hinge or Tinder or Bumble or whatever the heck, or I met him over here at church or whatever it is, and we've been on one date, and I kind of like him or her, and then you're thinking, cool, but yeah, I'm very attracted to that person, and oh man, I definitely got to be careful not to be able to sleep with them, because if everything goes well, we could probably get married in about 4 years from now. You ain't gonna make it no 4 years. You ain't gonna make it 4 days or 4 months, depending on who you are. Okay, so the point is, you automatically discard all the important things, like building yourself into a better person, having some self-control, building yourself to the point where you have a value proposition that you can offer that person something good, getting to know the other person, understanding you're both going to be making compromises, understanding that God hates divorce, meaning let's not get so caught up in the idea of the wedding and everything and what everybody else thinks, and then end up having sex because we just pretend like we're not going to tell anybody and we're going to do it anyways. But we shouldn't be doing this because we don't really know what we're talking about. But I think, my parents told me that you can't have sex before marriage. And then if we do, we're bad. But every other commandment's fine if we break it, because Christ paid for those, but not for sex before marriage. So when it comes to that, we're going to get really nervous and we're going to let that trump everything. So we're going to hide everything about our relationship that is important, the intimacy. And then we're going to build this facade for everybody else to see. And then down the road, if the relationship that we're not showing anybody works out, then we can blend the behind the scenes relationship with the facade. And then everybody could, we can be the same the same people after the wedding. That's what we're going to do. And that'll work. Come on now. It sounds like somebody put some fucking LSD into your little manual here of dating and relationships. You might ask yourself, no wonder anybody who has a brain looks at people at church or looks at the Bible and they're like, this looks like a cult. And then I met some people, and they're the biggest fucking hypocrites that I've ever met when it comes to these Christian people, or these, Muslims or whatever. It's bullshit. Or the Catholic priests. What the fuck? It's so frustrating that you look at it and you agree with the hedonist. You agree with the pagan, the non-Christian. You're like, yeah, these people are hypocrites. My people, right? They're hypocrites. I know they're all fucking behind the scenes. We know it. We know that every single person is having the same struggles as they go through their courtship or their dating, and they just hide it. Or they don't hide it. And then what happens? They go to church. Timmy, you've been really doing good with your obedience to Christ. But when it comes to Sally over there, I noticed you didn't come home last night, so I think you guys might have had some intercourse. I think you might be going to hell. You're going to get disciplined with that. I know everything else has been going really good with your obedience, but when it comes to that, that's a game changer. Have you ever been disciplined by the Lord? It's going to be rough. How many times have you seen, heard, or given that talk to somebody when maybe every once in a while you got to take a thought to the actual 10 Commandments where you find all those things? I happen to have them written there so I don't fucking forget them. And you realize, the first commandment is I got to love God more than myself. And I've just never done that, even one day, 1 millisecond of my entire life. But, I guess I don't get disciplined for that. God wouldn't discipline me for that, breaking the first commandment. But he's definitely going to discipline me for the 7th one and the 10th one, because the 10th commandment says, don't covet my neighbor's wife. And I've been looking at that bitch a lot because she got a nice ass, right? But that's fine. That's fine, because that's what the gospel is all about. That's all washed away. But when it comes to sex before marriage, totally different. You better be obedient. Now, I'm obviously poking fun, but we have all been there. You've all had the conversation. You've all had the awkward vibes going on. And for those of you non-Christians that I hope get a good laugh right now, you know what I'm talking about. And here's what I'm here to tell you. That's not Christianity. That's not the Bible. That's not the character of God. Okay. The character of God is very straightforward. And when he gives us marriage, what he's giving us is an idea and a blessing and a privilege that we get to represent the gospel in a living, breathing union that is symbolizing Christ and the church. And what all of eternity is about is what Christ did on that cross for his bride. Therefore, in this life and the next, what you're going to wind up remembering, even if you had a marriage that only lasted a year to a couple years, whatever it is, in eternity, everybody will look back at that, because that was a time where two people lived out a living, breathing representation of the gospel of Christ on the cross for his church. That's what all of time hinges upon. We will never forget those. Your marriages will never be forgotten in eternity, because you have something that is not up to you. You're in the image of God. You were given this because it's his design. And in that, you represent something that is much bigger than yourself. When you understand these things, you start understanding how important it is. And then you have a reason to better yourself. Then you have a reason to think about, why should I wait to have sex? Or should I not worry about it? Or should I be thinking about marriage? Or should I not be thinking about marriage? Right? You have a reason, because you realize what we're doing will never be forgotten. It's not done in the secrecy of your home behind the shades in the closed doors. It will be exposed for all eternity. And all your previous sexual experiences are going to be something that is actually remembered, right? And the idea behind this is you didn't do them good. None of them were done good. Okay, they're there so people remember that, and they see our fallenness, and then they see the beauty of what Christ actually did, that he didn't do it the way we did things. We see all of our brokenness, all of our bad marriages, all of our divorces, all of the cheating, all those things. And then you see the purity and you see the holiness of how Christ laid himself down for the church. And when he comes back and consummates that marriage, and we are united together, he never fails his wife. And we'll always be reminded of all of our human failures. And it'll always point to the glory of the everlasting husband that we have, who always keeps us secure for all time. It could never be better. And when you understand that, you have a huge reason to strive much harder in your marriage, to strive much harder to prepare yourself before your marriage, to fight much harder to keep that marriage together. You start understanding what this is really all about. It's about the glory that Christ gets from his bride, the church. That's what it's about. Not about you and your wife, or your husband and wife. So without that understanding, we're going to continue to see failure after failure after failure after failure, hands down, because we don't know what we're doing, and the problem with it is it wasn't an issue in the past, because in the past you had less social pressures on marriage, because people were happy to get married even just 100 years ago. If it was 1924, you'd have been glad to get married. You got married at 16, 17, 18, because that was not only just the societal norm, but in order to be able to have sex, you needed to be in a marriage, because you're going to get pregnant. There was no birth control back then, right? So the idea is they were not too negative on the idea of getting married. So we didn't have this issue that we have today, where like the last thing you'd ever want to do is get married, And so as we continue on with this, just keep in mind that all these things that we're focused on are much bigger than the surface level approach that we always take to it.
Do you see that a lot, where the partner or the other partner that you're not dealing with has accepted
Yes.
the other partner cheating? Well, not cheating, but they've allowed them to just quietly go in.
I've had a lot of people who come in and say to me, he had a bunch of affairs over the years and I just let it go. Like,
really?
Or she had a bunch of affairs over the years and we didn't make an issue of it.
Okay,
yeah,
so
really. And see, just the fact that and it's understandable, I'm not criticizing you, but the fact that you go, really? Okay, why would that be that shocking? Like, people cheat all the time. People step outside of their relationship all the time. People like diversity of sexual partners.
Okay, so here's the question then. Have you ever seen an affair in the presence of someone being in love?
I don't know that I'd be qualified to say whether someone was in love or not. Here's what I will say, because love is an emotion and love is a verb.
Do you know what I'm saying?
I've certainly seen people that were having affairs and in every aspect of their outward life appear to be deeply committed to their marriage.
Okay, so they were
an economic provider. They were a diligent parent. They were attentive to the emotional state of their partner. They still had an active sexual relationship with their partner, but it wasn't let's say, a terribly prolific one, perhaps.
So you can cheat and be in love?
Sure.
I kind of just have him here to kind of give us that perspective on the backside as we tie in, dating, courtship, and then eventually, do we need to relate that to any type of marriage anymore, or is it a waste of time? He's the one who we want to look to that gives us the perspective of what we don't want to think about, because most people jump into a marriage, or maybe they plan on it, whatever it may be. Maybe it's tradition. Maybe it's just something they really wanted to do. Maybe they had it in their head. Maybe they were told they needed to do it. Maybe it just felt like the natural progression of the relationship. Once they get there, if it wasn't very well thought out, they find themselves in that percentage of people that it doesn't last, and that's, I've heard a lot of different percentages, but if it's over 50%, man, those odds are pretty rough, to be honest with you. And so when you find yourself in that place where things didn't work out the way you thought they were going to work, you'll find yourself with somebody like a James Sexton. Now, he's going to give you a perspective that we should listen to and kind of put in the back of our mind as the boundary lines, as the safety net, as your life jacket, like your thing you don't want to use unless something really bad happens. Life jacket's a great way to look at it. You need it. You need to know these things, but hopefully you never have to use them. So that's what he's here for.
But like, we're all familiar with the 10 Commandments, and theoretically, if that story is true, which again, it's not provable or disprovable, but God handed down 10 rules. Like, talked to humanity and said, here's 10 rules. Don't kill. Good one. Honor the Sabbath. Good one. Okay. Don't cheat on your spouse. Don't covet your neighbor's wife. It got 2. It got 2 rules. Like, he didn't say thou shalt not kill. Like, seriously, don't kill. That's right. No, but don't sleep with other people got 2 out of 10 rules from God, theoretically. Like, that's amazing. That should show you how long this has been a thing.
So, in closing, to summarize kind of where we want to start, where we want to look at a foundation on these components, right, is when it comes to dating, we want to make sure that we're coming to the table not just as our best selves, right? That's too easy, right? We have to come to the table with a good value proposition for the other person, right? So it's not about you, it's what you have to offer to the actual institution of not just marriage, but of this long-term relationship. Because what you have to offer, if you come with your best self, you know for a fact you're human and you're going to have a lot of failures. That's not anything that should comfort the other person. It's like, hey, by the way, I have a track record of failing pretty much everything that I ever do. I mean, at least if you give me a long enough time span, I do good for a while, but for the most part, there's going to be some setbacks here and there. We might get up after that, but this is not a straight linear line up. I have the ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs. Hopefully it's in an upward trajectory, but a lot of ups and downs. So that's me, but I'm going to bring my best self to the marriage or to the relationship. So when I have my down, hopefully you're just fine being, you'll tolerate it, I'm sure, because there'll be more good sides than bad sides. I promise, right? That's terrible. That's terrible. That's terrible. You need to have a good value proposition. What do you actually bring to the table? Like, what is the component that is going to keep you together, right? Where is your heart at? Where is the aspect of your mind? Like, what is it focused on? Why are you doing this? What does the other person have to hold on to that is bigger than your failures and what you have to offer? Like, is this something that you're coming to the table with, that the other person who's like, yeah, I'm going to take you up on that proposition, knows that you are anchored to something larger than what you are. That way, when you fail, when and if you fail, the thing that you anchored yourself to, that was that was the actual value proposition. This is what I want our relationship to be founded upon. Not just me, but this ideal, these axioms and these given truths or proven standards are what I want our whole relationship to always be about. And when I fall down, we're going to keep striving for that, right? What's the value proposition? It can't be the best version of you, but you have to get to the best version of you and build your skill level up and do the research and do the understanding for what long-term relationships look like, and especially what marriages look like, right? And then once you understand and do that, now you have a good value proposition for the other person to look at and consider, right? Now, when it comes to actual marriage, right? In this particular arena, if you want to avoid, hanging out with old James Sexton over there after the divorce and you've lost half of whatever you've built up until that point, and it gets worse every year that goes by because you don't want to go through a divorce when you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, right? Or later, whatever. And you don't want to ever go through it, but it's just worse as you get older, the divorce. So in order to avoid those things, unpopular opinion, but there's no sense in going to get a civil union done until you understand what actual marriage is. You have the civil union, which is where the state gets involved, and then you have the actual marriage, which started the moment you had sex. You don't need to complicate those two, because it's complicated enough once you've had sex with somebody, and whether you understand it or whether you believe it or not, that's when God says you're married. And you're under all the accountability of who he is, what he said, and what he's done, and how that relates to marriage, right? So it doesn't mean you're going to hell if you have sex with somebody and you mess that marriage up and you move on and you guys never got married, maybe had a one-night stand. It's not like you're not a Christian. It's not like you're not going to be able to move forward. It means that there's consequences tied into disrespecting something as sacred and as beautiful as what God has designed to be a living, breathing representation of the church, Christ, of the gospel. When you abuse that, you should be very aware that your consequences are going to be very, very, very heavy. which is why we all look at it like, okay, if somebody's slept with a lot of people or had a lot of one night stands, that's a bad thing. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're atheist, agnostic, and even if you're just like, I don't really give a shit. When you sleep with a lot of people, you get diseases. That's also there as a consequence, right? And so the point about this whole thing is not to look at what God designed for marriage, to be confused with what the state designs as a civil union, which has to do with liability issues, tax purposes, and general order of society. Totally different. Two totally different things, which is why when you add and you combine the civil union and you file that paperwork, all the complications come in. Now all of your personal things like your finances and your assets become, up for grabs, and they're the collateral that needs to be divvied out once the state comes in and says, you did this wrong, you did that wrong, what do they got for collateral? Divvy that out here and there. Because this is what we came up with in order to keep the peace and to keep things fair and equitable, because all those things are important when you have civil rights. And it gets very, muddled, and it changes around every year, and it changes every year. Divorce laws change every year. So many things change, versus if you understood, now that I've had sex with somebody, I am married. Therefore, am I committing adultery? Not with that person, but you're still committing adultery every time you look at somebody else. So we need to clarify that. Okay, it's not okay to have sex outside of marriage. And it's also a totally different conversation to say, I don't want to get married and I want to live with somebody without having that profession and the wedding, because that's a different aspect where other people are going to take that as great. So I guess we could just do whatever we want. So that wedding is the external representation of what Christ has commanded.